Hey, it's GunsmithBeard back with another gun video for Gun Talk, and as always, it's really good to see everyone. I know we have quite a few new faces, so first and foremost, thank you for joining and subbing the channel, and welcome. I hope you guys and girls like the content that we put out each and every week, and thank you for your support. If it really wasn't for you guys, this channel wouldn't grow. So as always, it's super humbling every time I see the numbers that we're constantly growing, and it's because of you guys. So big thank you to you, and also a big thank you to our channel supporters, because if it wasn't for them guys, there wouldn't be a lot of content on the channel, because as you know, guns are expensive, ammo's expensive, everything's expensive, especially with the economy we have. It's pretty expensive. So big thank you to Brownells, SWAMPFOX Optics, and Shooter Innovations for giving us content to put on each and every week, and that is a tall order, so I'm very appreciative to them also. So without further delay, let's take an up-close look at the gun, and then we'll have a tabletop and we'll talk about it. So I'll see you soon. All right, guys and girls, welcome to the tabletop of this Dan Wesson, and it is an exciting moment not only for the channel, but let's be honest, for GunsmithBeard, because Dan Wessons are notoriously well known. It is a household name in the gun industry as being not only a top shelf, top tier kind of firearm company, but the quality of their firearms are legendary. And so having one on the channel, having one in my possession is always a great honor. But let's dive into a very short and sweet of the history of Dan Wesson. Is Dan Wesson Firearms began in roughly 1852 with Dan B. Wesson, which is the great grandfather of D.B. Wesson, which was the co-founder of Smith and Wesson. Smith and Wesson. So connecting the dots, if you didn't know that, Dan Wesson, no shock to all of us, is one of the co-founders of Smith and Wesson. And you kind of get why the quality of their firearms and the innovations of their firearms are so phenomenal. So they led for about 100 years, carrying the family legacy with firearm innovation. Dan Wesson was founded Dan Wesson Firearms Co. Inc. in 1968. So multiple generations of very predominant people innovating firearms in that family. So just a powerhouse like you would expect, kind of like the Winchester family, a very powerful, very smart. Browning is another one. So we could keep naming like really predominant people in this industry. So how did CZ USA get involved with Dan Wesson? Well, as you know, in the gun industry world, there are big fish and there are small fish. And I'm not saying Dan Wesson is a small fish, but in this circumstance, I am, because CZ Firearms, or CZ USA, bought out Dan Wesson in 2005. And so that happens a lot, and especially in this industry, is they tend to buy out, bigger companies tend to buy out smaller companies, and then they conglomerate or create an umbrella corporation. And so that's exactly really what happened. Is CZ USA became the family company of Dan Wesson. And so that's kind of where that happened. So why did Dan Wesson release the Eco line. So at the time, as you know, concealed carrying pistols has been one of those things that it comes in waves. Some people really start exercising that constitutional right of carrying a gun, especially concealed in the state that they're in, if that is allowed, which, let's be honest, it should be allowed in every state. If you go through that kind of background check, you should 100% be able to carry that gun, especially having to get permits and go through all the hoops to get it. Every state should allow it. But anyway, the Eco line was introduced to be a competition to a lot of the guns in that size, frame, and category for concealed carry, a smaller gun. And so I'm going to flip this around so you guys can see. And this is a really nice hard case, by the way. It has his signature and the company's name on the outside, and then it is lined with this really pretty Duke blue or royal blue kind of color. But before we go any further, I'm going to show you real quick that there's nothing in the chamber and there's nothing in the mag well. And then my magazines have nothing in the actual magazine, nothing on the follower. So the reason they released this was because they wanted to compete with all the compact guns that people were carrying because they were lightweight, and Glock had released a ton of different guns. And so they were trying to dip their toes into that. Well, the problem with that is you're competing with polymer guns. And this is a metal frame, metal slide, which are inherently more heavy to carry, and they're just heavy guns. And when this Eco line first released, you'll notice that there's an Eco little branding that was cut into the slide. So, and it's relatively small. I don't have big hands, but it is a relatively small gun. This gun weighs 25 ounces, which, if you know anything about 1911s, that's insanely light. This, at the time this was released, it was the smallest and lightest 1911 on the market, period. And that is saying a lot. But there were some inherent problems. Like I said, this gun is very well made, handcrafted, a lot of fitting of parts and getting it all to work. And if Dan Wesson was going to stamp his name on it, then he wanted it 100% correct. Well, for that kind of meticulous quality and OCD-ness to making sure every gun is perfect going out the door, you're going to pay the piper for that. And that's one of the biggest things that I think killed this in 2019 when it was discontinued. So the Eco line was discontinued out of production. They stopped making them. Doesn't mean you cannot buy them. It just means they're not in production anymore because they're really expensive, and it's competing, like I said, with polymer guns. And polymer guns, as you know, are very, very light because the frame itself, the bottom part of the gun, is actually made out of a polymer plastic. Even though polymer technically is a type of plastic, it's not plastic, but very hard, durable frame like a Glock. Well, this gun was competing with a lot of different guns at the time, and Glock 42s, Glock 43s, then you had the Glock 48s, the 43Xs, and everybody else, let's be honest, everybody else was doing it too. Like you had 6 Hour doing their 365 and then their X macro, excuse me. There's so many guns out there. Everybody's competing for that audience and doing a really good job doing it. And the price tag of this was just out of sight compared to those. In all fairness, if you bought 3 or maybe even 4 42s or maybe 3 43s for the price of this. So MSRP on like a 43 is about anywhere from $400 to $450, somewhere in there. 42s are a lot cheaper. But again, you're comparing 380 ACP to 9mm. This gun, the MSRP is about $1,700. So we're talking a drastic difference between a Glock and a, an Eco Dan Wesson, a 1911. And a lot of guys that own 1911, especially higher end 1911s, will tell you that there is no comparison to a 1911 to anything else. And so it's one of those things that if you've never owned a 1911, it's one of those things that you're better off saving your money and getting a really nice one, spending the money, because you will definitely get dividends in getting one that all the parts are hand fitted. The craftsmanship goes into it. Usually the first thing guys do that know anything about 1911s is they shake it and see if they hear the slide and frame rattle. And this one is super tight. And that's kind of what you're looking at right off the gate, is the craftsmanship. And you're going to find it in a Dan Wesson, because Dan Wesson, like I said, is very OCD and meticulous about what his name goes on and how the design and purpose of that gun, like how that works together. Let's talk a little bit more about all the features on this, because we kind of talked about the history and the production life, but we haven't talked about kind of what this gun really offers. And so one of the things I will tell you is, and this is kind of a really great tip for anybody buying a 1911, no matter if you buy a budget one that's under $1,000, which that's not hand fitted. I'm just going to be honest. When you get into sub $1,000 for 1911s, usually the parts are mill or memmed parts. They're not good parts. They're not bar stock steel. They're not tool steel. They're just not as good. But if you're going to go that route, the first thing I'm going to tell you, regardless if it's a cheap 1911 or it's a really expensive 1911s, is this is the heart of a 1911, the magazine. So when you go look at magazines, you want to know what brand. And there are a lot of different brands of magazines, but you're looking for the top shelf magazines, because if you try to run a crappy magazine on a really nice 1911 or even a lower budget 1911, it's problematic because it's not reliable. The magazines are the heart and soul of a 1911, and if you get a bad one or you get a cheap one, usually it makes this gun almost unusable. The reliability literally tanks, and a lot of guys think that that's how 1911s are when it's just a cheap magazine. So you get two really nice 7-round stainless steel polished magazines with this gun. And of course you can buy a lot more, but this is what it comes with. You can kind of see how the casting of the lining of the box shows too. But anyway, a really, really nice box anyway, but two great magazines. So one of the things I will show you right off the gate, you can tell that your grip panels and the grip screws are a little bit higher end with an Allen head instead of a slot head. The grips are a G10 material, which is basically compressed paper to the point where it's like concrete, and then they mill it and put the checkering or designs into it. G10 is one of those things that is really, really hard. You see it a lot in knife handles. It's very predominant in something that needs to be rugged. And so really, really good grip panel. It even has DW kind of embroidered into each panel, so you can see the other side. And it's, in my opinion, it's like a white, gray, and black kind of zebra striped thing or design. It's definitely pretty. It's probably not what I would have picked if I got to custom order this, but it's a really nice grip. It feels really good. There's a lot of textile grip on the front part where your fingers kind of wrap around the grip. As always, you get a really phenomenal trigger. It has a solid shoe, and this is the trigger shoe right here. Skeletonized hammer, which means it's skeletonized. The meat of the hammer is actually cut out, so you guys can see that. And it's a matte stainless finish. So is the trigger, and it does have a set screw in here, but to be honest, when you feel the trigger, I wouldn't go mucking around with this too much because it is a phenomenal trigger and it's very reliable. I did about 12 trigger pulls to see what the poundage actually is because Dan Wesson said it was about 4 pounds. Well, when I tested it 12 times, I was consistently getting a 3.1 pound. So a whole lot lighter than what they said, but honestly, it's super clean and crisp when it breaks. So, and I'll show you that in a second. But you do have your traditional thumb safety. It's not ambidextrous, so there's not one on this side because this was designed to carry. So they're trying to cut a lot of the frou-frou out because this is really a gun that they really wanted people to carry concealed or carry in general. It does come with higher end sights. You'll notice that it's a dovetailed front and a dovetailed rear night sight on both front and back, but it's also a Novak cut. The tritium in front and back, even though I think the tritium on this needs to be replaced because it's very dim. And so it's about time for another one. And you'll know there's a tritium right here. The back blade is a tactical with the serrations. It's gonna be really hard to get that on camera. But the serrations are definitely there. They're not as predominant as you see on a lot of guns, but so there is a tritium tube here and a tritium up front, and you kind of, it's a figure 8. You line both of them up like that, and then that's how you get on target. One of the biggest things I noticed when I first picked this thing up is the barrel, and it is a bull barrel that has been ramped down, and this really funnels the slide into lockup. So it's a target barrel, and I'll show you in a second that on the hood of the barrel it says match because it is a matched target barrel. So on your hood it actually says matched target barrel. The barrel I think is a 3.5 inch barrel, which you would kind of expect with a gun this small. Now, the closest size frame for this thing is an officer's, but Dan Wesson claims it's like an officer's, which means it's not exactly an officer's. It's maybe a little smaller from what I've read that they kind of describe this frame size as. And also one of those things I'll tell you is you'll notice the serrations up top to cut down on glare, but it's tri-cut too. And what I mean by that is there's a flat here and there's a flat here. And when I was making 1911s and learned how to make 1911s at gunsmithing school, this was one of those added features that you see in custom guns, is that tri-cut on top, because inherently the slides are round, and they come in and they tri-cut it with an end mill or fly cutter, and they flatten that out, and it gives it a really cool and very useful edge on it. Now, these sights are also supposed to be a non-snag sight, so it's supposed to be designed for carry. But besides this thing having a match barrel, a lot of higher end parts in it, the feel of the gun is top notch. And just real quick, so you know, we're still clean, no ammo, nothing in the chamber. So that's the definitive wall of this trigger. So little pre-travel, and then it stops. Just like super, super clean. And then this is the reset. I mean, it's like almost, I take any pressure off of my trigger finger and it's like resets. The reset is insanely short. So again, this is definitive all. You can kind of feel it, and you can anticipate it too, because like I can feel the wall where the trigger just stops movement. And then if I push past that, the hammer falls almost immediately. So one of the cleanest triggers on a really high-end 1911 that is a production 1911, not a handcrafted one. But just the trigger alone is why a lot of guys, to be honest, fall in love with 1911s. And you can tell the skeletonized hammer sits into the recess of this beaver tail. And if you're not familiar with 1911s, the reason beaver tails are really nice is hammer bite. And like, especially in my hands, if you get a real high purchase on the grip, sometimes the meat kind of wants to hang over. And this protects that from the hammer biting the top of your hand. And so the beaver tails are really nice, especially if you're going to shoot this a lot, you're going to carry it. Having the beaver tail on a higher end gun is nice. And to be honest, even the lower budget stuff, you're going to buy a 1911, I think, as long as you're not trying to keep it period correct, because it's like a War I or War II 1911, and you're trying to keep everything the way it was for value reasons or just because of nostalgia, beaver tails are always nice to have in 1911s. If you have a 1911, I'd love to hear about your experiences. This is one of the higher end 1911s. And so I was tickled to be able to have the honor to be able to show this on the channel, and hope you guys really like it. This thing, again, is a very, very cool 1911. And at the time, it was cutting edge. You know, back in the day, this thing was the cutting edge, being the smallest and lightest 1911 on the market. So just a really, really cool gun. As always, I hope you guys really enjoyed my Dan Wesson, the gun of the week, and this time we have to kind of talk about guns and spin guns. Now, I will preface this because I know there's always firearm historians that jump on my channel and love to correct everything that I say. But I'm not a historian. I'm just a gunsmith that likes to build guns and likes to shoot guns. So feel free to educate us on more of the history of Dan Wesson or the Eco line. I'd love to hear about that too. I love feedback. So again, I'm no expert, just a guy that loves guns. But anyway, I really appreciate my time that you are taking and spending with me to talk guns each and every week. So this is my Dan Wesson, and as always, I'll catch you in the next video. Work hard, God first. See ya.